Thank you all for joining us tonight. Let me just say it's always a pleasure to be with Chris Matthews, whom I have a great deal of respect for, and who shows the kind of shrewd and, I think, responsible journalism that many of us admire. In fact, he has his roots here in San Francisco, as many of you know, wrote for the Examiner, and is really also a diligent author. Those of you who have an opportunity to read this new book will have a sense of just how good he is at narrating and bringing to life experiences that he went through, serving, of course, for Tip O'Neill those years that Ronald Reagan was president, and seeing the two of them work together. And, you know, tonight is billed, can we get back to that kind of amity or way of working together in Washington? It certainly seems at this point, as we're in our second week of a shutdown or a partial shutdown, as if that may be a pipe dream. But I wanted to begin actually by asking Chris what he thought. Some of you may have heard the news, and a couple of you, how many of you actually heard us on the air this morning, just out of curiosity? Okay. A couple of people went up to me and said, does he really think Rand Paul's going to be, well, we can talk about that later.
I'm usually right, even if it's dismaying.
There was an announcement that indeed Janet Yellen, who is also local in the Haas School of Business, will be replacing Ben Bernanke. And I'm just curious to get sort of your seasoned political wisdom on this and what it may mean. I guess it's going to mean more bond buying because she's probably going to pretty much follow the Bernanke line.
Yeah, she's a dove.
Yeah.
First of all, she's a dove, and the second, she's a she. And I think that he was under, without mind reading, I think he's been under pressure to make more high-level women appointments. I think he wanted to name Larry Summers, who he obviously relied on and likes. And I think the pressure on Larry was from a number of directions, but one went back to, I think, his comment about women's ability or aptitude at math. I think some of these lines are very hard to pull back. I've made mistakes. It's very hard to pull that one back because it's what he believed. And so I think it was seen as derogatory. And
well, listeners may not know that when he was president of Harvard, he made some
he
remarks.
lost the presidency of Harvard over it. That was serious. And then he lost this chance to be Fed chair. It's a dangerous business in a highly wired society. You make a comment, and you know, Michael Kinsley, the genius liberal columnist, says that a gaffe is when you tell people what you think. Yeah. And it's often that you can make a mistake, you get an address wrong or mispronounce a name. Those kind of mistakes are all right, but just don't say what you mean, because then when you retract it, people don't quite believe you the second time. They believe you the first time, and they don't like it.
When you say the president was under pressure to...
I think that was
pressure by whom?
The reason I say that is because he could have named Janet Yellen weeks ago. What's this late decision about? She was there as deputy. Why didn't he do it before? This promotion is slow, and it must have been taken him a while. He must have had some... I'm just following the public pattern of the decision. She's been being pushed now for weeks by major newspapers and opinion leaders for a long time. And he finally did it tonight. It just looked like he was resisting it. That's all. Common sense.
And the Republicans are saying he's resisting negotiation.
It's like you date for 7 or 8 years and you finally propose.
I confess I hadn't thought of that analogy.
Well, then forget it. You don't have to think of it anymore. It's probably not accurate, but...
I was trying to make a segue there, Chris, and I was saying that there are many who feel that he's... in fact, he came out today and he said, I'll speak with Speaker Boehner, and he said, we tried 17 times to have negotiations to talk with the Republicans. They've turned us down that many times, and Boehner is taking this hard line, of course, which is probably not his hard line, but saying, nobody has asked us to negotiate. We will not negotiate. This is not, the Affordable Care Act, in other words, has to go out of the way, or we are not going to talk.
He can't give on that, and that's his baby. But let's be square. I worked on the Senate Budget Committee for 3 years with Muskie as chair and Bellman as co-chair and ranking member, and they used to agree on the same budget every year. That's how far we've come since the 70s. The process is passing a budget resolution after getting the Senate and House Budget Committee to reconcile in a conference, and then pass the appropriations. Ted Cruz put a hold on those budget committees meetings so there wouldn't be any budget and there wouldn't be any appropriations. So on October 1st, it was easy to shut down the government. It just took one vote. There was no appropriations passed or signed. This was a very systematic effort to stop the government and have this second shot at Obamacare. This is extraordinary. It's constitutional, of course, but it's extraordinary.
The New York Times had an article, and I think you're well aware of this. It said that it was all, it sounds almost conspiratorial, all strategically planned out by the Koch brothers, by Jim DeMint, by, in other words, people from the Heritage Foundation as a strategy. And if that is indeed the case, What's the end game here from the Republicans?
Well, I don't know whether it's coordinated at all. I wouldn't say unless I knew it, but it is interesting that the amendments that have applied now are attached to the debt ceiling are all oil and gas related. What is Keystone got to do with the debt ceiling? What does exploration and exploitation of federal lands, federal land management got to do with this? What has it got to do with offshore? It has to do with the Koch brothers. It's oil and gas. It ain't complicated. It's not illegal. It's not unethical, but put it together. That's what it's about. Power of campaign contributions, influence of people who are hard-driving lobbyists for the Koch brothers. I only say that because what a strange potpourri of attachments to a debt ceiling, none of which have anything to do with the debt. They have a lot to do with oil and gas. And that's what the Koch brothers are. So I don't believe in large conspiracies, but I do see cause and effect.
But we're hearing a lot of blowback. The Wall Street Journal had an editorial against this. Wall Street is not happy, supposedly, with it. And yet, isn't that going to weigh in?
Well, there's a difference between business Republicans who are traditional Republicans and these new grassroots people on the far right, which is about 30 or some of them. But they are the difference between getting 217 or not. I mean, they are the last 30 votes that Boehner needs, so they can just say, you're not getting our 30 votes. That means you have to go to the Democrats, and we're not going to support you if you go to the Democrats. This is beyond the Hastert rule of you have to get a majority of the Republicans. There's a new almost British Labour Party or British Tory Party discipline here where you must get all the party. You must be a straight party line vote or nothing gets done. That's not the normal American way is you poach some votes from the other side and you put together a coalition. That's how Reagan did it, most people do. You get some votes from the other side. You don't locked in by your most far out constituents. And those members of Congress are in their turn, I think, influenced most heavily by their most far out constituents. I think the real leader is not John Boehner, that's obvious. The real leader is the guy in the last row at the next town meeting who jumps up and says, you sold us out. That's the guy they're afraid of. You're like the rest of them, and they all roar and yell, and it's even tough for guys with real guts like John McCain to stand up to these people when they call Obama an Arab or something to his face. It takes guts, and most of them don't have it. They let the birthers rule their lives, and they're the worst of the Congress. I think anybody that accuses the president of being an illegal immigrant, of being elected illegitimately, is not a good person, and that's just my belief. Why would you keep saying that if you didn't have a problem with his ethnicity?
You don't admire Donald Trump?
No, not. I went to his wedding. I thought he was smart. I think he's smart. I don't know what game he's playing, but I can't believe. Well, first of all, the worst you'll say about the president, his mother was American, which makes you a natural-born American. You don't have to be naturalized. But he would say he was born through this weird process. A white woman from Kansas said, I think I'll marry a Kenyan, and I'll go get married in Kenya, and I'll name my kid Barack Hussein Obama so he can be president someday. It's insane. People that think like that, and I'll get the Honolulu papers to claim that he was born there, and I'll set it all up. Who is this mastermind, this fiend? Therefore, I don't believe he believes it. And I think he does it for his business partners. They like to hear it because it shows that he's really anti-Obama. They don't like Obama. So.
What about Ted Cruz being born in Canada?
Well, don't they see the problem? I think I've said from the first day I heard about it, he's eligible to be president because he's a natural-born American. This is nonsense. And even in the days when you had people like George Romney, born in Mexico, so they were an expatriate family because they were bigamists. It's not funny. This is the story.
It's a fact.
They went down there to have lots of wives, and he left the country, and nobody ever said George, Romney couldn't be president because they thought that was sort of a technicality. Nobody jumped up and down like that in the old days. Or that John McCain was born in the Canal Zone, or you don't jump. Or Barry Goldwater was born in Arizona Territory, not a state. These things are raised against Obama for the obvious reason. Let's be honest. I'm going to kid ourselves about this.
And if it's ideological now, if it's brinkmanship, and we will say brinkman rather than brinksmanship.
We're learning. We're learning to use that word, aren't we?
then one has to ask, how much of it has to do with the gerrymandering? A lot of these Tea Party people are in very safe districts because of gerrymandering, aren't they?
Well, it's a combination of that, but I think it's a stronger reflection of our segregated housing, which is the norm, actually, in the United States, where big cities are where minorities live. The housing is cheaper. They maybe feel more confident. They can't afford to live in the burbs. So what you have is Philadelphia, where I'm from, 85% goes for Obama. The Bay Area, 85% for Obama, for Nancy Pelosi, for Barbara Lee, the same thing, 85%. These majorities are overwhelming in the big cities, but they have no role in picking the Congress. So when you get outside the cities, as in Pennsylvania, you elect 13 Republican congresspeople and only 5 Democrats, because even though the state went 100,000 votes more in the congressional vote for the Democrats, the votes were apportioned in the big cities, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and I think Penn State, in that area, Center County. So put it honestly, the Democrats waste their votes in big cities. They have overwhelming numbers that don't transpire, but they're very good at electoral votes because they win big states because of all the big votes in the big cities. They tend to swamp the Republicans out in the countryside. So it's just a fact. There's 232 seats now that voted for Romney. So most members of the House represent districts that voted for Romney. And that's why they can always say, well, I'm representing my district. But they're not representing who won the election. And I think we used to have a wonderful tradition in this country. If a president gets elected, however narrowly, he gets a honeymoon. He is allowed to put his program on the floor and get an up or down vote on it. That's what Tip O'Neill did for Reagan, even though he really didn't want to see those budget cuts, because he thought he deserved it. He had won the country, and he should get a vote, a day in court, Tip used to call it. And so I think we've lost some wonderful traditions, and our comity is draining away because we don't honor these old wonderful traits.
You mean
I lived through them.
Respect for the presidency.
Respect for the voter who elected somebody. It ought to count. Elections that have consequences, you can't deny the voter the consequences of how they vote, or else they become totally frustrated and say, why am I bothered to vote? I'm not getting anything done. You're not to dislike Reagan to admit he was or like him to say he was a transformative president, because he was given an opportunity to transform. And now Obama's enemies are trying to deny his role, even his presidency, by taking away his major historic achievement, which is something the Democrats and even some Republicans like Nixon and Teddy Roosevelt were pushing for a century. And they want to take that away. And I think it's all part of this delegitimization of the guy. It's very personal. And the polls show it, very personal.
Well, given that, and given the impasse we're at now, I mean, this is the World Affairs Council. I want to go back to domestic politics, but what kind of transformative impact can President Obama have in terms of global
yeah, I think he's had a big
diplomacy?
role.
It always showcases affordable health care, so that's domestic. When you talk about Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they talk about glasnost, they talk about perestroika that followed, they talk about nuclear disarmament, and they also talk about Northern Ireland. Is there anything in the Obama administration, we're getting out of Afghanistan, we're getting out of Iraq presumably, but that really can be on that level or seen on that level, particularly for a second-term president?
Well, I think the more we look back on Ike, the more we respect the fact he kept us out of Indochina, and he kept us out of the Middle East. He kept us out of the Suez campaign. It took a lot of guts to say no to Israel, France, and England altogether. It took a lot of guts to face the Bien Phu and say, we're not going in with Operation Vulture. We're not going in. Those decisions were very vital, and I think history-making. And I think that Obama's luck, I think it's luck, has been, he's been able to at least witness in the short term some kind of developments in Syria, to the point they're actually inspecting right now for chemical weapons. Who would have believed that without a war? I'm a dove.
Yeah, but he did this.
I am against all these wars. I think they always end up being worse than we imagine.
In large part because of almost a mistake that was made with Putin letting out the possibility that chemical weapons could be inspected to bring some kind of resolution. It wasn't as if Obama was leading.
I'm not so sure that he didn't leap at the opportunity in a way that W would not have. I think if Cheney were around, he would have had a different reaction to those events. I mean, there's a certain desire for action on the part of people like him. And I think there's a real difference in the way. From the Cairo speech on, I think Obama, with whatever success, has stated a far different policy than he inherited from the neocons, a very different policy. And you can like or dislike them, but there's no comparing him and Hillary Clinton, who's a bit to his right, to what they succeeded. They took over from an administration which was sort of busy at war, and this country is weary of war.
But the rights interpretation might be something like this. Obama put down a red line, and when it came push to shove, Russia offered a deal. He took the deal. Maybe Bud W. wouldn't have taken the deal, but maybe he would have been forced to do something. In fact, it looked like that. Kerry was talking about, oh, it's small, and it's not very significant, but we're going to do something. Yeah. And the right would also say that Obama has not provided the kind of leadership that we saw. For example, he goes to Cairo, and what happens? There's an Arab Spring, Mubarak is removed, and there's an election, and the Muslim Brotherhood takes control. Now the Muslim Brotherhood has moved out, and what do we have? We have a government that may be the result of a coup, and we can't perhaps even give them aid because of that coup. We have Syria. We have Libya, which may be under al-Qaeda influence. And in fact, al-Qaeda is all over the Middle East now, or branches of al-Qaeda. I'm not trying to make a brief here, but that's the argument.
I think it's a tough choice, and it has implications in both directions. I believe that killing Arabs and Islamic people on television, worldwide television, every single night since 2011 has been bad for our policy. All we do is kill them. It's always Arab people and also Islamic people in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we just keep killing them. And that's what we do. It's the one people in the world we feel free to go to war with and kill. I'm very much against that as a foreign policy. I think in the end we're going to be hated for it. And I think we have to find, even if it's a more complicated policy, to find a way to find moderate forces in that part of the region and support them. It's very hard to find a solution, even in Libya. Trying to find good guys in Syria is very difficult.
There are no good guys in Syria. And you say we're going to be hated. We're hated. I mean, that's a fact.
I don't take that view.
I'm not talking about the Emirates now. I'm talking about...
I'm not talking about... I don't take that depressing a view. I think that supports the worst kind of aggressive policies, to say we're always going to be hated, so let's be obnoxious.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're hated, and that's a fact. That doesn't mean we have to be obnoxious or aggressive.
What do you do about it?
What do you do about it? You try to, of course, communicate. You try to move forward. You try to use diplomacy in the best way you can. You try to also have a reciprocal kind of communication. I mean, part of the problem, I think, between, say, as long as we're talking about the Middle East, between Israel and the Palestinians is they never were talking. I mean...
Oh, I know. They don't have a partner over there. Look, I think that we're trying to get somewhere in Syria to avoid our involvement. I think in Egypt, it's just going to be difficult. The good thing about Egypt is it's a real country. It's not like Jordan or some of the other. It's a real country with real history that even predates Islam. And I do have confidence in the country that it has some stability. When you go there, you feel it. You just feel it in the country. And I got to believe that at some point they're going to settle down into some new dispensation among the Islamic people who are more fundamentalist than the ones who aren't. But I don't think we can solve it by just getting into another war, obviously. And
what is the
it's
president?
so tough. I think we're protecting Mubarak's life. I think we have good relations with the military over there. In fact, that's our best rapport, is with soldier to soldier, general to general, major to major. That's our good relations over there. And I think it's going to have influence over time. But these are turbulent times. And we're trying to, as everybody tries to, reconcile democracy with stability. We're trying to do it. What's wrong with having it a little messy and keep working at it rather than just declare war? You know?
Is this the foreign policy that one sees in terms of the stature of Barack Obama and what he's accomplished? Because there was supposed to be a pivot, for example, to Asia, and now this impasse has put a thorn in that.
Well, I wonder what caused that problem.
Pardon?
It could have something to do with his opposition in Congress that's caused him the embarrassing situation.
No, it's got everything to do with that.
To stay home because he can't travel overseas, which reminds me of a third world country. You know, Mugabe can't travel. Our president can't travel. It's absurd. And it's part of the gradual, attempted erosion of the man's stature. It goes on.
Can you say there's anything in the administration, aside from the affordable health care, though, that is transformative the way, in foreign affairs particularly, the way Reagan was
I think rather killing the leader of the man who led the attack on us in 9/11.
Bin Laden?
I think it probably was more effective. We look back at, was it effective for us to go into Afghanistan? Maybe a more effective operation would be something like we're doing now, going in and grabbing leaders and droning the rest. I don't know, but I know these wars, we're now left with Karzai over there, who's basically telling us to leave, with no residual force, with no residual influence. I don't know what his deal is, but it's a very strange development. I mean, I know some countries don't thank you when you liberate them. The French were a little slow, but, I understand how complicated their history was because of the dishonorable truce they signed in 40. Peace, actually. But it's tricky, but war doesn't seem to work. That's my view. Yeah, it doesn't seem to work. It just kills more people and creates more antagonism and hatred. They're still arguing now.
It's a good, healthy view, but...
No, I know. We may disagree here.
No, I don't disagree. I've never been in favor of war. But what about...
That kid got killed tonight. He's 19 years old. His parents can't even go visit and take his body at Dover. I mean, these are horrible stories.
Well, and the right says this is being done by the Obama administration. You know that's who they're holding culpable for making things difficult.
Why do you have to present the absurt? That's not the case. That's not the case. The shutdown was proudly advanced by the right-wing conservatives. I mean, they've taken great pride in this.
It's my job to get you to say that. It's not.
Okay.
Every
once in a while you should throw in, you're right.
You're right. Let me just go back to something, though, and that is, I mean, neither of us wants war, but what about all the drones? I mean, they've really replaced war in many respects, or at least boots on the ground and all that, and we've got more drone use now than we ever even imagined would be possible.
It's all discretion. It takes the discretion of the commander-in-chief. I do hope that he's personally approving these or not. I think they are obviously invasions of other countries, violations of sovereignty and all that. And but we have enemies who are not states. We don't fight states anymore. We fight factions in other countries that may have found a place to hide, and we have to roust them out and kill them sometimes. And they're out to kill us. It's a horrible situation for someone who's a moderate like Obama. He is not a pacifist like Jimmy Carter was. I think he believes in violence when it's necessary. Carter was very much against violence of any kind. Mm-hmm. I mean, he hated Desert One. And even that was a totally peaceful effort to try to free our prisoners in Iran. It wasn't meant to kill anybody, really. But presidents can't afford to be pacifists, but they can't afford to be resistant to the bugle call. And I think Obama is. I think those moments when he held back on Syria created the opportunities that came thereafter, and Putin's chance just to be a big deal on the way to his Olympics, where he could become a national figure again, an international figure again. I think you make your breaks. I think Obama gets some breaks, and some of it's because he resists doing what other lesser leaders do.
I think we've come to the point now where we're taking questions from you, the audience, and thank you all for your cooperation. I'm sure good questions are coming from good people here, thoughtful people. First one, I'll just cue these up. What is the role of gerrymandering in the role of political polarization, and why has the media coverage been lacking on that topic?
Well, we talk about it all the time, and it's. I think part of the education people need to get is you can't just vote in presidential elections, because when you vote for state legislatures and governors in those midterms, that's when the decisions were made. The loss of the 2010 elections by the Democrats was crucial to the apportionment and all the attempts at suppressing the minority vote and things like that. It all came out of that. I'd like to think the Democrats as a party recognized the losses they took in a mid-year election. And I think you see it in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, everywhere. 35 states, Reince Priebus has been, if not orchestrating, overseeing this effort to suppress the minority vote and poor people vote. And it will have an impact down the road. At some point, they will get photo ID card requirements get through the courts. And they'll make it more difficult to vote. And that will hurt the party that has more poor people and minorities enrolled. So I think these kinds of lessons people have to learn. And apportionment comes out of the 2010 census. There came their every 10-year chance to do what they want to do. Phil Burton used to do it out here, by the way. Yeah. So everybody knew. He used to say, "You're in your mother's arms," to the members of the House.
There were people who loved the story you told on my program this morning about Phil Burton.
Yeah,
I don't know how many you heard it. It's in his book.
Well, the book, you don't have to buy the book if you don't want to, but let me tell you why it's important. I mean, seriously, I killed myself writing this because it's really my story of my personal experience, my memoir, and the reality of politics on the inside, where I really spent all those years. I was in the Peace Corps, and then I was working for these senators, and how I got into working for President Carter. I was a speechwriter on the plane right to the end. And I was there like Zelig all through those years, actually experienced it. That's why I'm so arrogant on television, because I went through all this. I know how they do it. And I think if you care about watching the show, it's an interesting sort of little program to what you're watching.
Did you say you were arrogant on television? Right, I'm sorry.
No, in one area, I know nothing about many things like hockey. But other people are handling that for me. But I do know a lot about politics.
How much does hockey come up on Hardball?
It doesn't because I don't know anything about it. So what was the question?
Gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering, remember the importance of mid-year elections, because they really decide who has the power. And every 10 years we're going to go through this. And the great story you said. So it's the House vote on the budget, late spring of 1982, and the Democrats didn't have enough votes. Republicans didn't have a vote. It's that interregnum between Reagan's first year when he had all the power, the second year he was beginning to lose it during the recession. And the Democratic moderates were trying to get a budget through that the liberals didn't really like. It wasn't really a liberal budget. So Phil Burton is wandering around the floor of the House, drunk, And I say, he looked like Harpo Marx in hell, this gigantic figure, looming around the room, looking for black members that he could talk into this, and the black caucus tends to be on the left, and he said, come on, let's bring down this budget. And he goes up to Henry Waxman, who's about half as tall as him, and Henry's like a fire hydrant. He stands right next to him and says, he goes to another guy, you can forget the friggin', I didn't use that word, you can forget that friggin' judgeship. This is a guy about to retire from the House. It was hardball. And I went up to the speaker, I said, you gotta stop Burton, he's bringing his bill down. And he says, what am I gonna do? He's drunk. And so this went on because the Congress, when it votes at night, they serve white wine, which is enough, by the way. It is a lot if you have a couple of those carafes. They started having debates at 8 and 9 o'clock at night after a Thursday night dinner. Watch. It's great stuff, but it's not necessarily great legislation or oratory. But Burton is Burton. They loved him. Guys like George Miller worshipped the guy. But he was out of hand that night, and that was one of the stories I got to watch.
A lot of questions, Chris.
I'll be short.
How do you reconcile your own role in working for a partisan media outlet with the polarization of politics, and what should media's role be?
Well, I think that if you only watch us, you're not very smart. You ought to watch me, and maybe some of the other people you should select, and then put your own stew together. I say this to every group, especially young people. I say, if you think Uncle Walter is going to tell you that's the way it is, you are crazy. Because the information is subject to all the various prisms that you can view it through. The more prisms you look through, the better. New York liberal, establishment liberals, what the media had been in the past. Cronkite, the rest of them. They were all New York establishment liberal, sort of like the New York Times. They read the New York Times in the morning, that's where they get their news. That's where the budget comes from. Early in the morning, they read the Times, I know what's going on. And I write my budget for the night news based on the New York Times. If you think that's objective, go with it. If it's one point of view, accept it. But accept other points of view. And I think, I try to read Peggy Noonan every week. I try to mix it up a bit. I think there's some morons on Fox, but there's some people on Fox that have some brains. I think Shep Smith's pretty good. I think that O'Reilly is a rangy kind of guy with an attitude. It doesn't hurt listening to him, but I think you got to put it together yourself. And I really do believe if you have brains, you read a quality newspaper, a local newspaper, some local television, national television, and you watch Charlie Rose and things like that, and you listen to this fella, because the best thing that I've come across traveling the country with the books over the years is the regional National Public Radio. That's the best. You get a long interview, and you get a long interview by somebody who's read the book and knows what to make of it, instead of somebody reading questions that some producer wrote for them. And it's a real conversation with an equal, if you're lucky, and better than an equal in many cases. People are much more well-read than I am, and it's an honor to meet them in New England or anywhere, in Minnesota. There's so many good NPR people around the country.
Well, I got an email after you were on the air this morning that said, how come MSNBC went so far left after Matthews? As if somehow Rachel Maddow and Ed Schultz and everything, that was a decided major turn to the left from you.
Our owner's Comcast, but our president, Phil Griffin, doesn't instruct anybody what to do. I've been unpredictable a long time. Maybe I'm moving left on some things, but the issues I care about, race and war, are the two biggies since the 60s. I set my agenda back in the 60s. I care about civil rights, and I care about peace and war, the biggies. I'm not Mr. Liberal on a lot of these issues. Immigration, I want both sides. I want a balanced program. I don't want just another stupid Simpson-Mazzoli pass we don't intend to enforce. I want a real law that we're proud of.
Well, we can't get an immigration bill.
I know we can't get a proud law. If we can't pass a law on immigration that we're proud to enforce, we should just give it up. And that's what I worry about. We can't do it.
What about after Newtown? We couldn't get a gun control law. I mean,
that is a problem. It is a problem.
Congress's dysfunction?
It's not just Congress. It's the American people and guns. It's American culture and violence. If we got rid of all our guns, we'd be the most violent society. Look at the numbers. A huge minority of the people killed in this country are killed without guns. It's unbelievable how violent we are. I mean, I don't know what they kill themselves with sometimes. They found some way to do it. And other countries have, I think, worse suicide rates, but when it comes to killing other people, Americans do it. And it's something that, some anger that's free-floating. And why do people have guns in the back of their trucks? Why do they have it there? Why do they talk about it? And I think some of these movies are ridiculous. And I think, I don't mind cowboy violence. It's sort of like cartoon violence. Nobody's going to behave like those kind of people. But this sort of sadistic killing that seems to be a big part of a lot of the movies. They want to see the face of the guy falling off. They want to see John Malkovich realizing he's falling 20 stories. It's very important that we see the close-up on the face. It has to be really sadistic. What's that about? I don't think they do that in Japan or England or places like that, where they have 27 murders a year in the whole country. You know, it's really something. I live in D.C.
A lot of violence in Japanese
five
films.
biggest murder.
You think about Japanese authors, there's a kind of cult of violence there, but...
Well, that's like Canadians at hockey, you know. They get very excited about it, but nobody gets hurt, you know. It's just... well,
they don't have
They
guns.
lose teeth. They lose teeth. That's as bad as it gets, you know.
They just... Samurais fall on their swords and things like that.
Yeah, well,
actually, you know, your political awakening came in the 60s, like mine.
McCarthy.
Pardon?
It
Yeah.
was Gene McCarthy. There's
Well,
no kid who was.
I went out and worked for him too, and so did you. We were clean for Gene.
I
And
loved
here's
him.
somebody who says, because you mentioned the Peace Corps, as a fellow returned Peace Corps volunteer, I have long wondered why government leaders, when thanking military personnel for their service, never thank Peace Corps volunteers.
I am amazed at this president sometimes, who I always tend to support. I mean, I do like his values. I agree with him on the big stuff. I don't quite understand his political behavior. Like, why doesn't he hang out with some members of Congress? He can make friends up there that could help him on both sides of the aisle. Why doesn't he fraternize? Why does he meet people at hotels? Invite him to the White House. That's a big deal. I know the trick. If you go to meet him at the Jefferson Hotel, you can leave when you want to leave. You don't have to wait for them to leave. But people would be really impressed if you invited them over to the White House at night.
Could I submit a thesis here?
Why?
I think that W had a high Q rating because he was very social and convivial. Same thing about Ronald Reagan, and the same thing about Clinton, obviously.
Definitely.
I don't think that Obama, he's more of an introvert. I don't think he has that kind of gregarious personality.
Yeah. The thing is, he had that overt talent in oratory right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I made the mistake of thinking that oratory was an indicator of other talents. When in fact, it was his talent, oratory. Most people like Kennedy, I've studied, didn't really learn to give a good speech until they were 1960. It took them all their career to develop the ability to get up and just talk like we're doing, even with the kind of ease we have, you know. But Obama, like the time when he first gave that speech in 2004, I don't know about you folks here, my immediate reaction, which I expressed out loud on the air, was, we've just heard the first African-American president, right there. It was undeniable, and there, again, I'm getting that chill. Because I remember exactly the way he talked about our country. And when he said, only in this country is my story possible, I am wowed by that. I am wowed by the proof of our democracy that we can elect a guy with that name and that background. I am still impressed by it. For all the crazy 20% in the House and 30% that call him who are birthers, the rest of us have totally accepted him and his family. That's the great thing about this country. Michelle is really liked. The kids are beautiful. The guy's done everything right in his life. He's never broken a law. He's never broken a rule. He's raised a family beautifully. He's never been a money grubber. Everything about the guy is what white conservatives say they want African Americans to be like. And they still hate him. You explain that to me.
You certainly hasn't broken drug laws?
No, well, you are a real pest.
Did I hear applause for that? Okay, more questions.
But you're good. You're good at that.
Is he
you find the flaw in my logic, but you're right.
Is he actually? Just came back to me. Do you know who Bill Mann was?
No.
He had a great line about you. I just have to give you a riposte here. He said, because you were raised Catholic, and
I am Catholic.
You are Catholic, right? He said, and this may be something to be proud of. I don't know. He said, Chris Matthews. He said this in print, so I think I can use it here. Chris Matthews would interrupt the Pope. Have you ever heard that line?
No, but I wouldn't. I really would like to get the interview so I could interrupt him. I think Francis is great.
I think he meant Benedictine.
I think he's the best. He goes back to, let me educate you, there was the encyclical Rerum Novarum back in the early part of the 20th century, all about social justice and all about the need for unemployment compensation and child labor laws and Social Security. Many of the reforms that came out of the New Freedom and they came out of the New Deal came out of the Pope's encyclical. It was Leo XIII. Dorothy Day Catholicism, the Catholic worker, the very left-wing Catholicism, all came out of that. So we like to hear from that side. And so I know we're always going to have arguments about abortion rights, And I think abortion, the church has a position on the issue of who gets to decide it. I still think should be a little more deliberative the way they look at it, but I don't think you can put someone in jail for it. But they haven't fully gotten to the head on that. But I think things like social justice and minimum wage and living wage. Living wage was a big part of that encyclical, way ahead of its time. And so if you're a progressive Catholic, you're very much on board with this new fella, this Francis, because he's a pastoral guy. He took care of people. He wasn't some intellectual in the Curia. He actually dealt with poor people down in his country in Buenos Aires. So I think it's wonderful. I hope I get to meet him someday. And I'm already trying to figure out how to do it. But I wouldn't interrupt him.
Have you tried prayer?
I've tried it all my life, Michael.
Yeah.
And I haven't yet dedicated it to this yet. But
tonight before I go to bed, you may have an opportunity.
Thanks to you, Michael Krasny, I will act. But you're a great guy to suggest it, because I know you mean it. I mean it. Thank you. Prayer is
the elimination of earmarks a major reason for the decrease in Boehner's leadership ability?
Yes. I think the old horse trading, and I'll do this for you. Remember how they used to have these big fights, and the presidents would need 2 more votes in the Senate, and they'd give what was the Cornhusker, whatever it was, the deal in Nebraska. And they'd always find something. If you could get it down to 2 or 3 votes, presidents would always be able to win, because they could find that little thing. Remember Johnson always wanted to know what Ho Chi Minh's button was. I can get him if I can figure out what he really wants. It's just because he wanted his country back. And he wanted all foreigners out of his country, and he wanted to own it all too. I think that's one of the weird things. Tim used to say, by the way, that. When they asked him when he lived through the 90s, he said, how are things changed? He said, the people are better, they're more honest, and they're more educated, but the system's worse. So with better educations and cleaner politicians, and they're much cleaner than the old days, they don't steal money. I'm talking about the Congress people. But they don't know how to get along and grease the skids like they used to. They don't know how to work together and log roll and be team members. That's gone. They used to, Rostenkowski and Bob Michael, 2 different parties, and 2 other members of Congress used to carpool it to Chicago every weekend. It's a 14-hour ride. 2 members of Congress slept on a mattress in the back of the station wagon, and one would stay awake with the driver, and they'd alternate all the way through. You don't think that bonds, guys? You get to know each other. You talk about your family problems, your kids, your wife, everything.
Doesn't happen in Washington anymore.
No, they don't travel together that way. They don't hang out with each other. Newt Gingrich came along, and he was a real menace. Gingrich came along and said, leave your wife at home. Yeah. You talk about all the divorce problems, the messing around, all that stuff. You got to have, the best way to be a congressman is to have the money, as Tip used to say, if you can afford it, have your wife come with you, and then you campaign on Saturdays alone. And you come back and you're with the family for dinner and eat the dinner together at night if you can. You see the kids with their homework problems. Otherwise, your wife, if you're a male, your wife ends up carrying all the burden of all the fights at home. When the kids get in trouble, she has to call you at 11 o'clock at night. Well, you won't believe what happened now. And she's feeling like she's unburdening herself on the husband. He says, do I have to listen to this? And all of a sudden, all the girls at the office start to look good. And this is the kind of crap that starts. You've got to bring your wife with you. And I think that Newt saying, keep her at home with the press secretary. You'll get reelected better. You kind of make some, you can't be into total politics.
In Newt's case, which wife was he talking about?
Well, you know the story. So while he was impeaching Clinton, he was busy himself.
Yeah.
So,
where does executive power come into the Congress? There's often this shibboleth about LBJ and how he was able to bring suasion upon congressional representatives and really hurt
he knew
them
the button.
Like feral cats. Pardon?
He knew the button.
Yeah.
He would always,
but Obama,
you know what he said one time. I don't like a guy unless I got his pecker in my pocket.
Yeah, I remember that. I didn't want to say it, but you said it. But no, the truth of the matter is Obama doesn't seem to have that kind of power where many people...
No, I don't think he's interested in that either. No. That wouldn't be his metaphor, nor would that be his practice. No, he doesn't want to be that intimate with any of these guys. I'll meet you at the hotel. And No, Johnson liked intimacy. He would talk to a guy 6 inches from his face. He'd lean over into him. There's those great pictures of that. And he just wanted to know what he had for breakfast. It was unbelievable how intimate and pushy he was.
But he knew how to own people, he knew how to charm people, even that kind of faux charm of his. And Obama, as we said, seems to be a bit introverted, non-drama Obama, all that. and doesn't necessarily know how to press the levers or the buttons, as you put it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that matters because Pelosi is so good at holding the House together. I mean, they haven't lost a vote, hardly any. And Reid, he seems so quiet and reedy and skinny and not really, but yet, and that voice and everything seems so boring, but yet he is a great leader. You know why? Because they don't want a really good-looking, great speaker as their leader, because that's taken away TV time from them. So senators want them to be and look like Harry Reid. That's what they want. They don't want Ted Kennedy to be their leader. They don't want that. Or John Kerry. They want guys that are kind of like, oh, well, we got to do this.
Oh, speaking about TV time.
And by the way, I speak the truth here, even though I laugh at it, because that's the way it works, you know.
I wanted to ask you about, there's a story in your book, again, getting local just for a moment, about Tip O'Neill not wanting to go on one of the Sunday talk shows, and the producer of that show happened to be Walter Shorenstein's daughter, and suddenly there's, shall we say, different kind of suasion for Tip O'Neill to go on.
I knew I couldn't get him to do the Sunday shows because he always wanted to go home and hang out with his family, and Joan Shorenstein, Joan Barone, married to Mike Barone, and she's the daughter of Walter, who I knew Tip loved, Walter Shorenstein. He just really liked the guy, and he was a great contributor to the Democrats, and Tip just personally liked the guy. So I said to Joan, look, you've been trying to get me for weeks now to get the speaker to go on Face the Nation. She was the producer of it. I said, there is one way to do this. Get your dad to do it. And it wasn't the most professional thing to do, but it was the way to do it. And he said, okay, I'll do it. Now, if he ever knew I was pulling this stuff, he'd be mad at me. But my job was to push him, to get him to do this so he could take on Reagan. Get on television, take him on. I'll be the guy pushing for that. There were other people saying, don't do it. You know, I was the one that says, go at it.
Well, how about when you commented on the Quayle-Benson debate?
Made a mistake.
And Tip took you to the woodshed.
He called me at 8 o'clock Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. He said, what are you up to? Because I said Quayle won. I counted the points, not the home run. There was only one moment in that debate anybody can remember. Everything else, I think I was getting a beer for Will Hurst. He was at my house that night. He was my publisher. And I wanted to get a beer. I come back and guess what? The home run. You're no Jack Kennedy. Killer. One line, gone. Goodbye.
I'm in my early 20s and have grown up in an increasingly partisan country. As someone who hopes to remain politically engaged, can you point members of my generation towards something to look forward to in politics?
Well, I would point this person who wrote this, and you're here, to do something yourself. And find a politician you believe in and get involved in helping him or her. Maybe it's Hillary. And see if you can improve the system. It's not a spectator sport.
You're getting a lot of questions about Hillary's chances.
Well, I think she's not a great politician like Bill, who's a natural. Bill is frightening at how good he is. If you've ever met him, you've got the seduction thing he gives you. You know that look he gives you? Yeah. Like you're the only person on this planet. And I'm uniquely interested in you. And I've figured you out, and here's what you want to hear, because I'm going to say it to you. It's like the Great Gatsby. He sees you and the whole world with a definite prejudice in your favor. That's Bill. It's unbelievable how good he is. And it works with me. So I'm tough. But Hillary Clinton is an intellectual, a hard worker, does her work, meets her responsibilities, very dutiful, very clean in her politics. I don't know if she has the magic he does. But it may not be necessary, because I really do think the country, women who dominate Democratic Party politics, they outnumber the men, especially in Democratic Party politics, and women my age have said enough of this, it's our turn. I really hear it, I hear it all the time. And I think that's coming. I think there's a movement behind her stronger than it can be stopped. I think she'll be better off with a few tough opponents. I think if I were Martin O'Malley or somebody, or maybe even Joe Biden, I'd run against her in the primaries and take the loss. I'd never attack her. I just offer an alternative. It might be fun, actually, to have that kind of positive primary fight. But I do think that if I look at her vote wins, she carried New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, California, every state you can think of with any population she won. The only one she lost was Illinois, because Obama was from there. She's incredibly popular among not just college people, but non-college people. Working people, the white people that live in Appalachia, from southwestern Pennsylvania down to Kentucky, down to Arkansas. Those people are going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, and the other thing is, I think she may snag some luck this time, where she may run against Rand Paul. And I think she can beat Rand Paul pretty handily, not easily, but pretty handily. I think a tougher opponent for her would be Jeb, if he could ever get the nomination. because I think people like him and he's smart and he's not a clown. And he doesn't pretend to know what he doesn't know. He doesn't have a freedom agenda. He would never say freedom fries. He would never be that ridiculous. He's a dignified man with a Hispanic wife, Hispanic kids. I mean, it's a very interesting family. He's being a Catholic and married into that world, and it's fascinating to think about.
Is Rubio out of the picture in your mind?
Rubio is out for a while because the right wing can't stand the fact that he wants to do comprehensive immigration reform. And they see path to citizenship as part of that, which they should, and they don't want it.
And they don't want Christie either.
Christie's probably too East Coast. Where I come from, we love him because he has what we call in Philadelphia attitude. And that's how we pronounce it, attitude. And when he said to that woman who called up, "What's your name?" He wanted to know her name before he found out what to say to her. He said, "What's your name?" They said, "It's none of your business." And then he remembered her name and said, "By name, I'm insulting you." And everybody loves that because it was none of her business where his kids went to school. Yeah. And I think a lot of people in America are touchy today. They don't want to be told what to do. And this big guy who doesn't have any, he's not normal size.
Looks like William Howard Taft.
I know, Taft won too, but
yeah.
I like him because he's just interesting. He called me up one night and asked what I thought of his opponent after she was on that night. I thought it was interesting. What do you make of her? He's killing her. But I don't know the guy very well. I met him a couple times, but since I come from that Catholic background, I sort of know guys like that. I know like guys like me, actually, kind of talky, mouthy, and we enjoy life.
Yeah,
his wife is great.
Talk about guys like that. What's your take on Biden? I mean,
smarter than he sounds.
Is he? He
is really in the interstices of. I think Obama listens to him a lot, and he hears from him, and he trusts him, he likes him, and I think inside the room he just has that weird thing, that gaffe proneness. But he was right about Afghanistan. We should follow an anti-terrorism campaign there, not a counterinsurgency. Pretty sophisticated about foreign policy and the law, but he jumps the gun too much sometimes, and it's very hard to have two reputations, to have one that you're smart and one that you're not. And it's a challenge. He's a good, by the way, anybody would like him. I mean, I don't think he's a
very likable guy.
And he comes up to Nantucket. We have a place up there. He comes up every Thanksgiving, and he just hangs out with his family, his regular family, and they all love him.
They get you to Afghanistan.
And they love him in Delaware. They love him there.
Get you to Afghanistan for a moment, because it sounds like we're going to have to see some talking with the Taliban.
Well, I can't figure it out, but the Taliban are there to stay, and we're not. And that's the whole problem with going into another country. We knew we were going to lose Vietnam in the end because they're going to stay and we were going to leave, the VC and the North Vietnamese. They were going to leave, so eventually we'd leave. And once it was clear we were leaving, they were going to win. The mathematics of that is so logical when you think about it. You can't change a country. Now, the British were in India for 200 years or something. They were able to affect that culture. It's very hard to go in and affect the culture in 10, 15 years and make it a democratic country. They are what they are, what they are. And the people that live there will stay there. And Karzai knows the day will come when we're gone and he's facing the Taliban out to kill him. And what a world he's facing. And yet he's saying to us, leave. It's very hard to figure why he doesn't want our protection, but he doesn't.
Well, a lot of it's political. First of all, I mean, he's corrupt to begin with, and he wants to continue that corruption. And the United States represents, particularly in terms of Pakistan and in terms of those who are fundamentalists, a liability to him. Yeah. Don't you think?
Sometimes I can't figure out our policy toward the Taliban in Pakistan is, and he's allied with the Pakistan.
Yeah.
The Pakistan Taliban, but not with the Taliban in his country. Right. This is so complicated for us, and yet they're instinctive about it and tribal about it. We're trying to figure which Taliban is this again, and which one are we fighting to the death, and which one are our allies of our allies, and we don't speak the language, and it's so sad. And our soldiers getting killed again today over there.
So,
19-year-old kid.
Give me something positive here, because we're coming toward the end here. I mean, it's. What do you look at hopefully with hope, or what do you look at in terms of?
Look, I think we have a fantastic, exuberant democracy. When we have a presidential election or a mayor election in most cities, people get totally involved in it. Look at New York; they had the clown show going on there with Weiner and Spitzer. Those guys got cashiered by the voters. They thought about it a couple months. Goodbye. I mean, all the cameras chased him around, but in the end, the people go, Weiner, you got to be crazy to like him. And he won about, 7%. Spitzer, who's got a charm about him, unlike Weiner, he's charming, actually.
He's a lot smarter.
And he's a good, I get along with the guy, but, they said, we'll take the guy Stringer, the borough president. People make judgments. We make mistakes, but over time, we've had some amazing presidents. And I lean towards Reagan historically now because I think he really did do things good for the country, and other presidents wouldn't have been able to be as keen as the opportunities that he was able to grab. And
doesn't it bother you that Reagan is used as the icon by the Tea Party people and all those people on the far right?
He was very much different than them because he would negotiate, and he would really, he didn't go for the kill. And look at the people he picked to work with him. If he were a fanatic, would he have named James A. Baker to be his chief of staff, who was a reasonable pragmatist, a moderate in many ways? Nancy Reagan, I think, was a wonderful influence on him. I think she really pushed him.
She whispered in his ear
I
at
think
night.
she had a lot of influence to him about going for peace at the end of the Cold War. I'm going to see her on Saturday. She's an amazingly strong woman in her 90s now, and she's got all her marbles, and she's really charming. She's kind of I shouldn't talk like this, but she has sort of a girlish quality about her that's very youthful and upbeat, and you just like her. And her husband died of Alzheimer's. My mom died of Alzheimer's. We've sort of bonded on that, I think. She was a caregiver for all this. She kept that torch lit for her husband all those years. And he had lost his recognition of her. And for her, it was worse than the shooting because she lost her partner in life. And yet she carried on, and she doesn't complain. She's very admirable, I think. And, I just like her. When
you talk about his cabinet, though, what about Meese? Meese was in on this whole strategy, wasn't he?
I think, Baker was good, Darman was good, Duberstein was good, Friedersdorf. The guys I dealt with were good. I wouldn't say Oliver Stone was good. I'm sorry. He's not so good either, but Oliver North. I know Oliver North was a problem. In fact, I write about that in the book, about how Iran-Contra resulted because Poindexter and North went ahead and armed the Contras because Tip wouldn't let them do it legally. And they got so mad at him. Anyway.
Have you heard what the Republicans propose to replace Obamacare? Do they have any alternative to insure people with pre-existing conditions?
That's what's changed. Even Reagan, back with the Medicare fight back in the 60s, presented the AMA plan. They felt they had to offer up something. Today, they don't even bother. They don't even bother. Let the 40 million people sit in the ER. Just let them sit there and swallow. They're not our people. They're not our people. That's the attitude they take. And the Democrats said, for 50 years, we're going to give you health care. We're going to do what we always said we would do. And what Nixon said he would do. His was an employer mandate. And what the Heritage Foundation said we should do. And going back to Teddy Roosevelt, they've been promising this. And Obama did it. And they can't stand it. So they don't want to let the thing try out, although occasionally they tell the truth. Ted Cruz said in January, my fear is it will become candy and it will become addicted to it. They will like it. Just like they like the prescription drug procedure, the plan that Bush put through, W pushed through. They're afraid of these programs because they're afraid they'll become popular. That's their fear. They want to kill it in its crib.
You may call me a pest for bringing this up now, but what if you don't get the youthful numbers that you need to float the Affordable Care Act? And if you don't get that, there's some real problems, aren't there?
It is, and I don't know how, in Massachusetts, which is a state that has its own culture, it's working. I have young
Thanks
kids.
to Romney.
Yeah, yes, ironically. I have kids in that age group that would probably, they're very libertarian when it comes to this kind of thing, and they may end up paying the penalty rather than do it. But I think my wife is strong enough to discourage that.
Somebody said to
we
me,
have certain leverages with these kids still, and we have some. And
but if you're a kid in your 20s and you're
know you're immune. You ride a motorcycle without a helmet. You live life as if you'll live forever because you think you will. And sure, those people. I always say to people, "All right, get out on your motorcycle and put a sign on it that says, if I get killed out here, or I get hurt, leave me alone." That nobody wants to be left alone. Everybody wants the emergency crew to arrive there, the first responders to treat them on site with the best treatment they can, get them to the best hospital as fast as they can, give them the total treatment. Everybody wants to be treated as a human being when you're in trouble. And yet they say, but I don't want to pay for it. Well, that means I want someone else to pay for it. You got to do it logically with people and force them to accept their personal responsibility over themselves. And that's a very conservative idea. That is not socialism. That's asking people to be dutiful about their lives. And it was the Republicans who thought of this. And now they're running away from it, which is pretty lousy.
Another question about this, we haven't asked anything about the Supreme Court, but somebody in the back row wants to know, what potentially unforeseen circumstances to our democracy could you see if the Supreme Court rules in favor of McCutcheon?
It's frightening. McCutcheon basically is a South Carolinian money guy who wants to have unlimited spending. Now, Buckley Valeo is bad enough. Buckley Valeo allows you, if you're wealthy, to spend all your money running for office. The courts have always drawn the line there saying, yeah, you can spend all the money you want if you're Mike Bloomberg or someone like that, all the money you want on yourself, but you can't spend all your money on someone else, because if you do that, you can own them. That's basically been the philosophy of the court. You own them if you have all the money in the world, and this guy doesn't, this woman doesn't. So the idea is you have to restrict that amount. And by the way, there's, what's it, 120,000 or something if you move it around.
Well,
you spend money.
We also got Citizens United. I mean,
Citizens United was bad news, and it's just more of this. It's wealth. It's the Koch brothers. It's this grotesque commercial they've been running with Uncle Sam looking up a girl's dress. I mean, it's grotesque with some kind of calipers. You know, we don't need it. And by the way, the reason, this is about the circularity of this whole argument. For years, ever since Affordable Care was passed, the last 3 years, you've seen ads, $500 million in ads attacking it, $75 million endorsing it. That ratio is reflected in public opinion largely. And now, having trashed it successfully and financially for all these years, they say, see how unpopular it is? You know, just like Ted Cruz says, I made sure there are no appropriations passed. See how we can shut the government down, how easy it is. It's somebody else's fault when they perpetrate it themselves. So it's politics. You have to study it and be wise to it, I think.
This is Diana, who says, about oil and gas interests and the Koch brothers, some say the Koch brothers are smokescreen for much larger special interests. Example, multinationals, Saudi Arabia company, etc. Is this... I
don't believe that.
Yeah, okay.
I've seen these guys in action.
Somebody else wants...
They're for real. They're not smokescreens for anybody. They're very proudly influencing public opinion and believe they have the right not to be talked about. That's what they believe. We shouldn't even talk about them. We do.
Well, you mentioned Massachusetts. Somebody wants to know what you think about Elizabeth Warren. Tell us about her future.
She's a hero. And it's very... she's sort of the active wing of the Occupy movement. She really believes in keeping or making Wall Street straight. And I think everybody knows where she stands. She's tough. And she'll be around for a while because she's sort of like Phil Hart, one of those great senators that's very focused on a couple of issues. And Phil Hart's been my favorite senator forever because he did all the truth in packaging, truth in advertising, all the great consumer stuff and everything else he did. She's going to be like that.
Ever let her forget the Native American thing, do you think? I mean, in terms of public politics?
Well, you remembered it, didn't you? Yeah, she was Sioux-ish, right?
This gets a little inside baseball, maybe. Here's somebody from Santa Rosa who says, Tip turned the tide on Vietnam. Yes. Is it true, though, as Pete McCloskey told me, that Tip O'Neill changed his stance for supporting the Vietnam War when a Seoul college student asked him the question in his latest briefings?
Patrick Henry McCarthy
that was true,
stood up at a BC meeting that his daughter Susan set up. Susan is a pal of mine. She told her father, her father said, all the briefings I get suggest we have to be in this war. And she said, have you had briefings from the other side? And she set up her briefings for him, and then one of the guys involved in briefing him was a Harvard grad who had something to do with this BC event, Boston College event. And he was there, and he later ran for Congress. And he was the one that began the lecturing him on the facts. And Tip had a break with all the working class Irish guys around him who were still with the war. And of course, there's so many young people in Massachusetts and North Cambridge, townies, if you will, who didn't go to college, certainly in those days, and went to the military and got killed. You know, every little corner in Massachusetts, there's the flags and the monument to the kids killed from just those blocks, all the Irish kids mainly. They're all fighters, and they went and fought the war, and people remember that. That's why people in Massachusetts have a problem with flag burning and stuff, even though they're civil libertarians, because that flag's on the casket when it comes back. And it's really powerful. And they're very patriotic. Everybody says Massachusetts is so liberal. It's also very patriotic. And I think it was tough for Tip to come out against the war, which he did. He also came out against the loyalty oaths back in the 40s. The townies didn't like that. He didn't think the teachers had to take loyalty oaths. And that was him back in the 40s. You know, he was the first speaker in Massachusetts who was a Democrat, the first Catholic to be speaker. He put together the whole state. He had people run in every district so he could put together a majority personally so he could be the leader. He did all that when he's in his 30s.
You call him a surrogate father or uncle figure to you?
No, I think he's a moral figure because his conviction was always got to me. And I write about it in the book. If you work for someone who's overweight and not particularly attractive for television, not a media guy, and yet every day gets up in the morning and faces Ronald Reagan and all the attacks on him personally. The Republicans running TV ads with lookalikes of him, making fun of him. And every day he got up, and I quoted in that epigraph, which is something that Anthony Eden said about Churchill, which is it's one thing to do something impulsive in combat, that kind of courage, but to get up every day and do your job, and every day take the hits and the unexpected disappointments and failings, the things that go the wrong way for you, and to do it every single day and never break and never cry, never complain. That was Tip. That was what was great about him.
Good time for one.
And I think Reagan respected that. Reagan used to say, he's got a big heart and he cares about those programs. And that's the way he is. And Reagan understood that about O'Neill, even if he was a conservative. And, you know, there was, I mean, Ron told me this, that his father would talk around the house how fond he was of Tip. So this is great.
You talk about Tip's big heart, but I remember Reagan cutting out all kinds of social programs, not only in California, but on the Fed level. And it was, I'm sorry to say, somewhat also encouraged by Nancy, who you were speaking so fondly of. But let me go to one final question here. It's a good question to end with. David says, Chris, you radiate an authenticity that is unique in broadcasting. How did you avoid becoming two-faced?
Well, I think guys are in the Peace Corps with me, and when you're out there in the middle of nowhere talking to each other about everything, usually over an Aladdin lamp or something with a couple of cigarettes or whatever you've got, with me it was cigarettes, they get to know you. I don't think I've ever changed. I mean, I'm the same guy. Guys like Fred Reagan know me forever, and my brothers, I have 4 brothers, they all Republicans, and they all know me. I haven't changed a bit, so I changed my views, but I'm still myself, and I've got the greatest job in the world. Maybe you do, but I get the.
You get paid a lot more.
Damn straight. But I have Ari Emanuel as my agent. This is a pretty good deal, but it's a great opportunity. I think this argument's good.
Well, this concludes our program for the evening. On behalf of the World Affairs Council and the Marines Memorial Association, I ask you to join me in thanking Chris Matthews for this excellent
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.